Welcome to a special afternoon episode of the Unleashing the Future of Work, a guide podcast. I hope you're staying safe and healthy no matter where you're tuning in from. Today, I am joined this lovely afternoon by the awesome Elizabeth, who is the co-founder and general partner at Hustlefund, a pre-seed fund for software entrepreneurs. Previously, Elizabeth was a partner at 500 Startups, where she invested in seed stage companies and ran the Mountain View Accelerator. In a prior life, Elizabeth co-founded and ran an ad tech company called LaunchBit, which was acquired in 2014. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Stanford and an MBA from MIT Sloan. She's reviewed over 20,000 startup pitches, which is mind-blowing and crazy, from around the world in the last few years, and has helped numerous portfolio founders raise hundreds of millions of dollars. That's pretty fantastic. Her work and writing on startup fundraising has been featured in numerous publications, including TechCrunch, Forbes, Huffington Post, BetaKit, and more. You name it, she's been featured. And most importantly, she has a really amazing blog that you must check out that is fantastic and has all kinds of gems. And it's hosted on WordPress, which is pretty cool too. With that said, today we're going to be talking a lot about just entrepreneurship, venture capital, and her thoughts on what's going on in the venture capital and private equity space post-COVID-19. What are some of the technology trends that she's keeping an eye out for, and her story in building Hustlefund? Without further ado, I would love for you all to let me know where you're tuning in from. If you are watching this episode, let me know in the comments, and we'll answer and address any of the questions you have as we go on throughout the episode. This is a special afternoon episode, so make sure that you're tuning in and paying attention. With that said, hey, Elizabeth, what's up?
Hey, Tim. Thank you. You're too kind.
Thank you for finding time to be on this special episode with us. How are you doing?
Hanging in there. In fact, as a full disclaimer, if my two little kids run in, you can see the door behind me. All havoc will break loose, but we'll work with it.
So Elizabeth, talk to us. Let us share a little bit about how long you've been working in this space and the journey into building Hustlefund.
Yeah, so I've been investing in early stage startups since I'll call it 2015. I started in late 2014, and so almost going on 6 years now. And I've been building on Hustlefund for the last 2, going on 3 years now. So I've been around the block a little bit. I mean, there's certainly a lot of investors who have been around the block a lot longer than I have. But I think as you know, and perhaps others, like we invest, and I always have invested in a lot of companies. So I think that's kind of taught me a lot of things through School of Hard Knocks too.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about how, the investment thesis for Hustlefund came about, because I've actually watched the video from y'all's website, but I think it would be lovely for you to share with our guide community.
Well, I think we look at a lot of things from the perspective of founders. I mean, as you mentioned so kindly, I, previously had a startup myself, which I started actually during the last recession, which was something else. And,
which is ironic, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could not raise any money. And, the meetings that I went into with investors, they were all checking their stocks like during the middle of the meeting. And so it was just something else. And my two business partners as well, they've had experience on that side of the fence as well. Like Eric also, he bootstrapped his company. He didn't even raise any money. And in part, frankly speaking, it's because we really struggled to raise. Right. So I think we've seen firsthand what it is like to be a founder having experienced it ourselves. And it's brutal.
Yeah.
And it's brutal on a number of fronts, like, everything from, I don't know, a VC will ghost you, and whether it's inadvertent or, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not a wonderful experience. VCs are often late. I've had a lot of VCs change meetings on me like multiple times.
Yeah.
Usually at the last minute. And then, and then to the other end of the extreme, just like even really bad behavior. In 2017, we certainly saw some of that as well. So I think there's just a whole gamut of VC is not an industry that I think people should look up to. And I think actually almost to that end, when I was, I actually hadn't thought about joining a VC. I was actually thinking about what startup do I want to build next? And I realized actually, wait, here's this industry that's sitting in front of me that has a lot of problems. Let's go and try to solve some of those. So it's going to take a long time, but that's what our mission is.
Yeah, and I love how you and your business partner Eric partnered up, and you're building this amazing fund. What was the story behind that? How did you two meet and kind of align on this vision for Hustle Fund?
Yeah, I've known Eric for a long time personally. Like, he and his wife, and actually my third business partner, she and Co. We all went to school together. So I've known all of them for like what 20 years or something like that. But many years ago now, I guess in 2012 or 2013, actually, we teamed up to run a conference called HustleCon. And so that's actually how we first started working together. And we work together actually quite well. We're very complementary. If you've ever met Eric, like Eric is...
He's hilarious on Twitter.
Yeah. That's him. And I would say that I'm much more... he's the life of the party, and I'm the person like behind a computer. so that's kind of how we operate. And yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit more about when it comes to founders and entrepreneurs, what are some of the things that, you as an investor are looking at from a character set and even just an idea and execution set in founders and entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So I think dissecting that, there are a couple things. So one is, trust. And then the other is, actual execution. And both are important. I would say arguably trust is way more important, right? Like if you don't trust somebody, no matter how awesome their skill set is, you're not going to invest. So trust, well, how do you assess trust when you just have met somebody? It's really hard to know whether you trust them or not. But I would say that I think, and I noticed this a lot more when I was previously at 500 Startups, because, we just had people pitching us all day, like in running the accelerator. It was really a high frequency investing model. So you met all kinds of people, and trust starts at 100%. I think in this country, investors will give you the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, like this is a great person. But then like every little thing it gets docked from that. And people would tell us all kinds of things like, oh yeah, we have 9 customers, but then it turns out like you actually only have 2 customers and you were just like talking with 7 or whatever. or they're in your pipeline, right? Like people exaggerate, and that happens a lot. And I think especially for entrepreneurs, on one hand, there's this fake it till you make it attitude. And I certainly buy that to a good extent, but then there's a fine line between actual lying and being optimistic. So and that I think is a very hard line. And we hear all kinds of stories about entrepreneurs crossing that line all the time. And I think even if you just somewhat cross that line a little bit, then investors are like, whoa, I am out. I know nothing else about you except you just told me that you had 9 customers, but really only have 2.
Yeah.
So that's the trust side. And then on the execution side, I mean, I think this is actually where I have a lot of qualms and where I think a lot more can be changed in the industry. I think, trust is obviously always very hard to assess whether you trust somebody, but execution, one of the things that I learned sort of in the beginning of my investing career, like I would meet these founders, they'd be really good at talking. Like some people are very good at sales, and you just walk away like, oh my gosh, they're so amazing. and I mean, I think admittedly we all fall for this as well, right? Charismatic people in this world get ahead in life, even better if they're good looking. And, so I think there are people who have advantages just right out of the gates. And I think you can certainly add race and gender into that. But I think even putting that aside, like, extroverts like beat introverts on this, right? So I mean, but then it got me thinking, like I would walk away from a pitch and I would read my notes later and then think like, why was I so excited about that company again? Like if I just look at my raw notes of the actual facts that they said, it would be very different from how I felt during the meeting. And it occurred to me that actually that, listening to people's pitches is really not a great way to assess a company. What you need to do is really understand, well, what is it they're doing in the business? So that kind of refined the way that I also ask my questions. I also changed my questions. A lot of VCs ask things like, what's your TAM, total addressable market, and all these other things. But investors don't really ask that many questions about, okay, well, what are you actually doing? So for example, if you're doing customer development, like what'd that look like? Was it across 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months? And there's a big difference in my mind amongst those three, right? Like the faster you can do your customer development suggests to me that you are laser focused, that you prioritize that learning, that you also have hustle and drive to be able to do so, and that you also have some element of salesman or saleswomanship to be able to get people on the phone with you. So those things are important. Other things that I think VCs have traditionally asked, in my mind, are less important. Actually, I never ask about TAM. Yeah. So.
And I think, I love your perspective in terms of saying, looking more deeper into how are they approaching the business? Are they in product development mode, customer development mode, and versus just kind of saying high level, oh, what's the pitch? What's your positioning?
Yeah. I mean, the thing on the flip side is I also trained many of these people going through the accelerator to be very good at pitching. Right. And you realize that every demo day presentation is up and to the right. Like everything looks amazing. Everybody's always growing, but that's obviously not true. So you can always frame your story to sound great, especially if you have that skill set. And so that's another reason, like having done that before, I realized, well, people can obviously do that to me. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as well. Like, what is actually happening in the business? I want to know more of the qualitative, like, what is it you're actually doing? What questions did you actually ask in your customer development? Who did you call? What is the customer persona? Like all these things that really kind of digging into the weeds rather than the 10,000, foot pie in the sky kind of level of, how big is this market? And like, what new verticals can you go into in 5 years? Like that, you have to be able to get on the first rung to be able to climb up the ladder.
Powerful. And one thing you mentioned is that developing trust, you start at 100%, and then as they maybe lie or do something that's wrong, they kind of get cut off. Right now, everyone's remote, right? And I've been reading your tweets lately. I mean, you're a phenomenal tweeter. You're a prolific tweeter, and you've been talking a lot about kind of the shift. And because we're now in a remote first world, in terms of how private equity has changed and how VCs are even vetting entrepreneurs, I want you to talk a little bit more about, because Hustlefund is a completely remote team, and I think that's fascinating. How has COVID-19 kind of changed y'all's process and how you guys are looking at opportunities?
It hasn't changed ours, at least not very much, because we've always done our interviews over video conference like this, even pre-COVID. And so we've always, quote, assessed founders like remotely. And I think, frankly speaking, I think I struggle with this a bit, like to understand, I have plenty of peer VCs who are, not very confident in their skills in assessing founders remotely. And I kind of struggled to wrap my head around that a little bit, because when I was a founder and I was going to all these offices in Sand Hill, you dress up and, you're all polished, and that's not, I mean, it is me, but that's not really me, right? Really me is like in this room, like with my white padded walls here. And we're having like an informal conversation like this. That's really me. And so I always kind of felt like those in-person meetings were very contrived. And that's, I think it's kind of interesting that this whole industry has relied on that for so long. For me, I get my signals around the questions that I ask and if there are inconsistencies in people's answers. Like that's how I kind of assess on the trust front. But I think people often, my fellow VCs often talk about, well, do I see their shifty eyes and, or what is their co-founder smirk or something like that. And I think, there's certainly some of that. And, but I think you can even see some of that on video as well if you're looking for things like that.
Yeah.
But nothing really has changed for us. I mean, I think actually the big thing is like we actually are doing more deals, and probably it's because some VCs are doing fewer, is my guess.
So, I mean, for you all, it's still the same.
Still the same.
Yeah. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about, because, you all have been remote first. So you kind of have experience building and leading remote teams, right? So, what are 2 to 3 of your tips? Because it's such a huge conversation right now. And recently in the news, Facebook just announced, they're encouraging all of their employees to stay as remote as for as long as possible, right?
Yep.
And by 2020, they'll be 50%, not 2020, 2030 or so, they'll be 50% remote,
Yep.
right? So what are 2 to 3 of your practical tips on building remote sustainable teams? Because now a lot of entrepreneurs are building remote teams too, right? I know my co-founder and I, he lives in Seattle. I live in wherever I'm usually at doing these things. So we've had to, build our startups completely remote. So I would love to kind of get your tips on that.
Yeah. I think really nailing the communications expectations is incredibly important. And actually, I think for VCs, funny enough, we can actually kind of get away with some things because in some sense, our work is fairly isolated. Like I don't need to collaborate with my business partners in talking with an entrepreneur, but a product team does. Like they need to collaborate on an actual product. So I think over communicating certainly, and then like establishing upfront what channels are going to be used for what. So like I think there a lot of miscommunications can often happen over Slack or writing, and then you end up in these crazy arguments where somebody misunderstood somebody else. So understanding when is it appropriate to hop on the phone or video conference versus writing something in Slack. And I think even to the extent possible, like, can you create serendipity as well? And maybe you can in Slack, but I think one of the things that I did both with my product startup, which was also remote, several years ago, which was we bought everybody an iPad and we had a Zoom account. We also got a Zoom account, a paid one. And
before it was super popular.
Yeah, but I've loved Zoom from the very beginning. Like I would report all kinds of bugs in the beginning, and even like Eric Yuan, the CEO, would like respond right away. Wow. It was when they were so young. I guess in retrospect, I wish I had money back then to buy their stock. But the point is, like, we actually left our iPads on with Zoom on all day, and it never dropped. That's why I was so impressed with Zoom, because we tried Hangouts and Skype and all these other tools, and that just worked. So when you had sort of a random idea, you could just say it out loud. It was kind of like you were in a room with your colleagues. And so that was how we tried to create some serendipity. Obviously, for a couple of my teammates, that felt a little bit creepy, like, oh my gosh, I'm always on video. And so I think, some of these things have to be worked out, but what is the communications culture at your company, and making sure that everybody's aligned with that?
Yeah, so establishing a really clear communication framework and allowing that to lead to some sort of serendipity, right? Like, are there time zones or time frames where everyone's on Slack at the same time to communicate requirements?
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. That's powerful. And I think, going remote, there's a whole, you have to become a better communicator.
Yes.
I thought I was good at communication. Then I started building a remote company. I'm like, wow, like there's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of, how do you continue to create clarity? You have to use video, audio, and it's not just written text, because sometimes, people gloss over text, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and within Hustlefund, we also survey everybody when we onboard a new person, whether they're an intern or they're actually an employee, on their work style, and so that way, some people are really bad at email, other people are really bad at Slack. Just like understanding that as it fits in with our own communications expectations. So for us, for example, Slack is more for here's the casual thought or whatever. Email is, this needs to be done. Like if you're putting actual action items into Slack, like it may be lost, and you should realize that is kind of our corporate communications culture.
Yeah. So, I want to lead that into asking you, there's a lot of, I think, innovation happening right now, because I feel as if COVID-19 has been that Cambrian explosion to listen to new ideas across everything, right? Whether it be e-learning or product design. And, I'm even seeing masks now on like aesthetic looking masks with a ventilator, like all of these new ideas. And I would love to kind of get your thoughts on what are some technology trends that you're keeping an eye out for, post COVID-19?
Wow, that's a tough question. And in general, I hate to play like trend call or whatever, because I'm always wrong. These are always wrong. But that being said, so health is a big one we're looking at. I think just in particular, a lot of regulations in health have been relaxed, where a couple of our telemedicine companies previously thought, well, maybe it's on our roadmap in a couple of years to go to all 50 states. But now, actually, they've expedited that because just there have been some legal changes in light of this environment. Now, whether those legal changes are temporary or whether they're here to stay, I think I would bet on they're here to stay because, if all of a sudden you're working with patients in Idaho and then next thing we know, the laws change, like you're going to have just a whole bunch of patients like lose their practitioners, their doctors, their nurses, their whomever. So I think that would be a disaster. So I would bet on that trend. And we are definitely looking at a lot of health companies. We always have, we already have 11 health portfolio companies, but we're still looking at more. And then I think the other one, which is sort of obvious and maybe perhaps is related to this podcast, is like the future of work.
Yeah.
That one is fascinating because there's just so many things in that category. And so we've seen everything from new communications tools, like that's a big category in itself, whether it's voice or video or asynchronous or synchronous or whatever. Like there's just a ton of people trying things there. I think it's going to be just sort of a matter of what people get comfortable with. But I think as a whole, if you see that whole sector growing, I think actually all of those will win. It's just a matter of how big. And then sort of beyond the communications tools, like sort of the next second order or whatever is around, I guess I don't know what you call it, services for remote work. So as an example, I just saw a pitch today that basically is a pitch for, an IT services marketplace where they serve people remotely, like they will come to your house. So instead of your IT department at your work, like now your IT department no longer really exists. So how do you get your stuff fixed? So things along those lines, I think as well will be big. And so those are the main things. I mean, I think the third order is for businesses that have traditionally relied on brick and mortar, like what are sort of peripheral services or products that they can sell. Like we're already seeing that with new companies. Food delivery is a pretty saturated space, but there seemingly is more room for that, like helping restaurants who couldn't do delivery before. I read about a bakery in LA that is putting together bread kits, and actually they make more money on their bread kits than they ever did on their bakery. And so, how can you help small businesses on Main Street basically come online in some format, or at least, supplement their revenue? So those are kind of the three future of work areas. And there's just a lot in each of those.
Yeah, no, I feel that those were some great ones that you outlined, and I think what I've loved seeing is how so many companies are coming to the aid of small businesses now. Whether it be Facebook launching Facebook Shop, or the government, and the PPP loans. I think that it's interesting this resurgence in emphasizing why our small businesses matter. And our service workers matter. And, one of the things I've loved is seeing the innovation in the healthcare space. And, some of the focus on telehealth. My dad's actually a social worker. So I've been, at home seeing him take calls with patients and just doing teletherapy. So it's really happening. Live and in action. Yeah.
How does that work out, actually? Does it feel like it's the same level of experience, or do you think it's harder to get people to open up?
I think he's doing a great job. And sometimes it's on the phone. Sometimes they're not using Zoom. They're using some other kind of video conferencing solution that the government has approved. But it's really participatory. It's interactive, and he does a lot of yelling. So but it's actually happening, and he's eventually going to go back to on site. But they are really in healthcare, they're really adopting this, and it's working. It's effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has basically forced a lot of organizations to change, whether it's health or remote working. Like I think 5 months ago, there are so many organizations that would never have considered it.
Yeah,
now that they're forced to, they can't envision going fully back. I do think people will go back. I don't think things will be 100% remote, but it's hard to imagine going 100% back.
Yeah. People are still going to be scared.
Right. That's going to be sticking around for a while.
Yeah. Elizabeth, thank you so much for tuning in and joining us in this bite-sized afternoon episode of Unleashing the Future of Work, a Guide podcast. What are your key takeaways for any entrepreneur, any potential founder out there that's looking to build the next big thing?
I think, so this is stemming from my experience of building my own company during the last recession. And actually, I think this is going to sound very bizarre and perhaps negative, but I think there's a little bit of a cleansing in some sense where I kind of felt like things seemed so easy as an entrepreneur. It's never easy, but with the way that the news writes about things, like a year ago, things seemed very easy as an entrepreneur. So all these people were like, great, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to start a business, not really understanding the full ramifications and implications. But now I think the people who are running startups now, like, big kudos to them and to you. Like, I think these are the people who are serious about their businesses, because, even though the environment seems scary, it actually is a very good forcing function to force people to decide, like, is this really what you want to do or not? And I actually think in the net, it's not actually easier or harder now than it was a year ago. But for whatever reason, just the environment seems scarier, and therefore people who are not serious about it would feel like, well, maybe I shouldn't do it.
Yeah. So it's you have an opportunity to choose, like, stick it through or not, right? So, like, a lot of resilience is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, the people who are left are resilient is basically what I'm saying. Right? Like, it's, yeah.
So shout out to Juana Sanchez, who has been tuning in the entire time. He says, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your amazing insights. And shout out to also Hamza, who's doing innovation for a global tax business. He says, thanks, Tim and Elizabeth, for this interesting talk. I would like to ask Elizabeth about what she thinks about crowd shipping businesses in the next decade. I don't know if you have any knowledge about that space, Elizabeth.
Crowd what?
Crowd shipping businesses.
Crowd shipping?
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is. Maybe you can tell me what it is.
That might be a new sector. Hamza, let us know, what is crowd shipping, or are you talking about crowdsourcing businesses in the next decade? Let us know. I'm sure Elizabeth will follow up in the comments. With that said, shout out to Kenna as well, who also says, you're so real, Elizabeth. Thank you both. So she really loved this episode. And Kenna's a rock star entrepreneur herself. She's always starting new things. With that said, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful live episode of Unleashing the Future of Work. Be safe and be healthy. And, Oluche is saying thank you both. Where can the people find you, Elizabeth, and your work?
Well, just as a shameless plug, you can find me at my blog, elizabethyin.com, and you can subscribe to my newsletter, which has tactical tips. But I'm also on Twitter, pretty active on Twitter, as Tim mentioned. Twitter. 33. And I also have no qualms just giving out my email address, elizabeth@hustlefund.vc. And I do try to respond to everybody, like, if your email doesn't go to spam. And yeah, it just may be a little slow sometimes. But and then I think if you do want to pitch us in our business, actually the better place is hustlefund.vc, which is just our website. That's where we streamline everything, including people who write to me. I will actually just direct you there. And that allows
free webinars too.
I'm sorry?
And you all are hosting free webinars too.
We are, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So make sure to check that out. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Bye. With that said, thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Unleashing the Future of Work, a Guide podcast. If you're interested on being in a future episode, please check us out, UTFOW.com. I appreciate y'all for tuning in to this special afternoon episode. Elizabeth is brilliant and she is a gem. So I'm so excited that she shared all those insights with you all. With that said, you all, have a great day, have a great night, stay safe, stay healthy, and more importantly, stay killing it, stay building something that you love. All right, y'all. Peace.